Okay, we're now in session 2. You've talked about genetics.
Mm-hmm.
What's involved there?
Well, I think where we left off is we were talking about the matrix and the different races.
Yes.
But I guess the important part of all of this to understand is that as humans, we're kind of a combination of this alien DNA, which has merged and perhaps evolved through our evolution here on this earth. Now, the interesting part of this is that how the human functions, how the human body is actually structured is the entire structure of this matrix is then built from the inside out. Basically, based on your structure as a human, this matrix is being built. All the compartmentalization, all of the systems that are set up in our paradigm are kind of set up in a way to create this very isolating, this illusion of isolation within a human. Okay, and that kind of can be anywhere from our sex, from our family, from our culture, our religion, our society, even our language.
I think if we do it just a little halt there, I think we got a bit of a shadow. I think it's to do with the sun.
Okay.
Let's see if we can. Oh, it's just the way the sun moves. Okay, back to that. The genetics, human genetics,
Mm-hmm.
and the matrix.
Yes. So the majority of my research is based on how our DNA is storing information that goes beyond this life cycle that we're living in right now. And so the concept is that basically the matrix that we live in, or what we believe is a matrix, is really built from the inside out. So our physical body, within the structure of everything, even down to the cellular molecular level, even down to the structure of the chromosome, is actually mirroring in the form of a fractal all aspects of the structure of reality, all the way up until you look at this entire organism as a matrix multiverse. And the way that this universe is kind of set up, in a sense, is we are moving through our experiences, through our environment, absorbing all the experiences, and all that information is then stored into the body down to the cellular molecular level. And of course we know about epigenetics,
Yes,
which became...
that's exactly the word tip of it, yeah.
Exactly. And
Which
so
until
that
quite recently was
20 years
considered-
ago.
Yes, yeah.
20 years ago, it just came into mainstream science, really. But this understanding is something that really has helped us kind of put together this image, this understanding, this overall figure as to how this reality is structured. Because if we take a look at how, for example, the human soul, when it comes and connects with the human body then connects to its genetic DNA ancestral lineage. Okay, and that ancestral lineage is holding information that, once again, we have the mitochondrial DNA, which is kind of like a photocopy, which is an aggregate photocopy of all the incarnations of that lineage since the beginning of it, since its origin, basically. And so each human is holding on to that information through the mitochondrial DNA. Of course, in modern science, we look at that information and we think that is junk DNA because we're incapable of understanding how to read that information. And so what science is now coming into is looking at something, they've called it dark DNA, like dark matter.
Ah.
Okay.
So junk DNA is now dark DNA.
Yes, and the reason for that is because DNA, in order for it to be considered DNA that is a consequence of epigenetics, that is writing information based on its environment, it's writing proteins based on its environment and information that's being introduced.
How does it write these proteins? How does it know what to write to
Yes.
solve the problem?
So basically, of course, we actually have 30,000 genes in the body, but each one of those genes know exactly what to do with a certain section of the body. And so any information that is translated, brought in through the organism of our largest organ, which is our skin, is feeding the information into the nervous system that then goes into the endocrine system, and all that information is somehow organized in the body. And when down to the cellular level you are receiving this information from the environment, it then will decide what of that information to store. okay? And so that will decide whether the protein will be written based on whether it's, you know, needing or enhancing more aspects, more proteins within itself, more chemicals within the body to help that aspect develop, you know, in a more productive way. And so what's occurring then is, I was talking in my presentation about that that experiment that they did with the lab rat, where, you know, they had the sequence, and they noticed that part of that sequence was not doing anything. It wasn't writing the DNA. So they erased it, they deleted, they removed that sequence. And when they did, these lab rats had mental illness. And so that allows us to understand that even though that DNA is not writing proteins, it is still a very integral part of the information network that is being shared within this structure of the cell.
Now,
right?
how do they determine from rats that they had a mental illness?
Yes.
How do they know the state of their mind?
Mm-hmm.
That they know they've got a mental illness?
Right, and it's not necessarily
brain deformity or whatever.
Not necessarily a deformity, just how it would react. They are able to what is it called? Record their sequences and emotional response to things, for example. And so the rat would no longer respond. It would no longer have that communication. And I think the testing that they did was like whether they felt emotional impulse from, you know, poking, unfortunately, the animal, to see how it responded to these high stress situations and simulations that they did. So, you know, first they would test the rats with the exact same, you know, procedure, and then they would remove that sequence in their DNA, and they would no longer respond in the same way. So you could see that there was a you know, an error in their processing of that experience. And so that allows us to see that the information network that is being processed there with the cell that's required to carry out these responses, then is very important, even this DNA that's not writing the protein.
Which means they don't know what the DNA does until they take it away and then something else goes wrong.
Correct, exactly.
Which they didn't even consider.
Correct. So that tells us that this DNA that we are calling dark DNA is actually containing a massive amount of information that we're not understanding how to read, how to process. And on the other side of it, it's helping us understand the actual structure of the chromosome. Because what we're looking at now, that instead of thinking of the body as a chemical you know, system or a mechanism, it is like it's actually a holographic, it's a projection in a sense.
Now that's a complete turnaround to what I call flat earth science.
Sure. And so, but this testing really helps us understand that, because if these cells, even though they're not interacting with each other and writing this information, it means that there's some kind of communication, and the only way to explain that would be quantum non-locality, right, in which these the information is then communicating with each other and requires each other in that network to produce this this form or this shape or the substance of what's being created.
So there must be some other dimension or environment where this communication is happening, which isn't bolted into the very simple chemical medicine view of biology.
That's exactly right. And so what we're now looking at is that the chromosome actually functions in creating a vibrational frequency that actually has a torsional field. Okay, so even the torsional field has a chromosome, the chromosome has this torsional field, which means that it's creating this biomagnetic field around it, and it's from this biomagnetic field that it's then creating this communication with its other chromosomes and other structures that are within them. The DNA, the RNA, all of these aspects are communicating with each other, creating this network. They did another experiment in Russia where...
Yes, the Russians.
Yes, the Russians.
Torsion fields, big time Russia.
Exactly, and so they were creating, they did this exam where there was a leaf that they ripped off the branch, and by attaching some kind of holographic technology that would communicate with DNA, and this allows us to understand how DNA is writing information as well, by matching the vibrational coding that DNA is emitting from that vibrational frequency. they were able to create a hologram. And when they hooked it up to that, it literally created holographically the exact perfect shape of the leaf that they removed from that branch.
Now, I know the Russians have got some kind of very advanced form of DNA technology which they can spot defects. For instance, this particular person had a mild focal issue with her eye, and they basically plugged her into this very advanced DNA type machine, and they could spot there was an error there, click, 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 fix that on the holographic side, and that meant she fixed her eye.
Exactly, exactly, you got it. And this is exactly what we're talking about.
Which means if you've got alien DNA, you can make aliens out of humans.
Sure, it can mean that, hopefully. But, as a result of all of this understanding, then the point of all of this is that we start to question, and my point of interest in all of this is to try to understand this hybridization program,
yeah,
right?
Well, that's exactly what I was referring to.
Exactly, because if our DNA is holding on to this massive amount of information, then what is in that DNA, which when I do healings, for example, and through my research over the years, what I notice is that our human system, the organism, is not only showing to have fragments within themselves within this linear timeline. So what I mean fragments is what happens to the human soul is that when we experience trauma, when we experience some kind of high stress situation, feeling helpless, many things happen. From a psychological perspective, trauma is kind of filed in the brain. But on a metaphysical...
But it's also a survival mechanism, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's a natural part of how the chemicals in our brain and our programs have been set up. But what happens on the metaphysical aspect, on the energetic side of the body, is the interesting thing is how the human soul, this consciousness, is fragmented in those circumstances.
Well,
Okay.
that is extremely important in terms of monarch mind control, where they call
Absolutely.
trauma
You got it.
in the child, and then multiple personalities. So that must then have an effect on the DNA.
You got it. And this is exactly why I was talking yesterday about how these programs of the destruction of divinity, of this integration of divine feminine and masculine, the complete destruction of purity, have been rituals that have been practiced since the beginning of our time, since the beginning of all belief systems on this planet, it seems. And if we look at some of these, Kabbalistic groups that are carrying out a lot of these ritualistic practices, one of their main targets and main ways of creating trauma and extracting the life force, negative life force out of these beings is through this kind of either sexual abuse or some kind of mind control programs, where what is occurring is exactly that. When a human undergoes sexual abuse, there is a deep fracture within the soul structure of that human being, creating fragments. And what ends up happening in a situation where a human organism is put under so much stress and pain and suffering over a long period of time.
This is happening in every care home in England,
exactly.
the UK.
Yes.
It's you go in there within a fortnight, that's happened to you.
Exactly. And so what I'm talking about is an entire structure of our reality, which is created in a sense to create fragmentation of the human soul. And so what we end up having is the human organism with several fragments, which are not only just in this timeline, which we can call this lifetime, with your stories, with your 100 years of life that you have, but now we're talking about patterns of cyclical trauma that we're carrying on from our ancestors, which we are then grouped together in an ancestral lineage, like a network based on the frequency. It's like almost as if we magnetically are tied to these lineages over a period of time.
So-called bloodlines.
Like bloodlines, right? But it's the information that those bloodlines are holding that allows them to magnetically reincarnate within each other. Now, the thing about this is that this is kind of what is helping us understand how the structure of this reality is built from the inside out.
Because it directly affects the reality of existence.
Everything.
So that's an engineering of reality.
Exactly. And so the human body is then subject to being fragmented on multiple dimensions. Not just one dimension, multiple
and this is
dimensions.
key to why several ET races are abducting us and doing things to us, because they're manufacturing some kind of reality in their interests, not in ours. Using us like a parasite.
Exactly, exactly. The exchange of information that is occurring between humans and these ET consciousness is that of a parasitic exchange, because they require life force, this consciousness, this infinite consciousness, to be cycling through these experiences where they are, in other words, like siphoning, dark, lower frequency emotions, and also the fragmentations of the soul. Now, where does hybridization fall into this? We're talking about the same thing. When there is a hybridization, we're taking the genetic material, this is from an individual, to create multiple, children.
Now, this is what the
hybrids
Germans are
from there.
working on. In the 1930s, I understand, if you shone ultraviolet light with the DNA of a dog, for instance, into the DNA of a human, the properties of that dog would be adopted by the human DNA. And that was simply illuminating light. And that was able to imprint, like a photograph, onto the DNA of the other animal.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's incredible. And
that's very crude, obviously, but things have moved on.
well, yeah, and I mean, I think that they have been trying to experiment a lot with this DNA for a very long time, which we don't know. We don't know the advancements that they're not public. They're not made public. The advancements on DNA.
But it makes the whole DNA programming thing way above Dolly the sheep. So cool.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, they made a big hype about the recent genetic modification of the children in China, of those two twins that were just born, where they were able to alter, so that they are now immune to HIV. And that was a big uproar, in the scientific community. But it's like they put these things out, so we're going to focus on those things while we're not looking at what's actually happening silently, globally, to thousands of men and women out there that are being collected for their genetic material and, utilized in
China's
these
famous
programs.
for that, people being scooped off the streets. But one of the things which is happening is that they've changed the DNA of the sperm in Irish cattle, which has changed the milk. And Irish milk, the Irish baby milk, the Irish powdered milk factory has been massively increased in size, by at least double its size, because its primary contractor is China. So DNA engineered milk in Ireland is ending up in Chinese milk. So that will do some kind of change to the Chinese.
Oh, yeah.
And that's from Ireland.
That's very interesting.
This is very complicated, and it's obviously something's being done to the Chinese that's not in their interests.
It's not in our interest, and I mean, at this point, I don't know what's organic anymore or what's natural, because
I think the reason for that is the Chinese don't have the enzyme to break down the
milk,
dairy milk,
the lactose.
So
Correct.
As such, the milk industry is such toxic. If you look at the state of the Irish, the dairy milk products that they overuse and things like that, it's we shouldn't be taking it. And so if the Chinese are then going to be engineered to take that, that's a deliberate engineering of the entire Chinese people.
That's correct. That's correct. And everything is being modified in a sense. I mean, all our food is genetically modified at this point. It's very hard to find anything that is not. But the other side of that is, how is it genetically modifying us? All genetically modified food is then affecting us, and we're not going to be seeing those results maybe even in this lifetime. We're going to be seeing it our next generation.
I think epigenetics, you got 3 generations. The mother has the eggs. She then produces a daughter, and then the daughter then produces the epigenetically changed baby. It's 3 generations, 75 years.
It is. However, that's true for the genetic, like illnesses and conditions like that. But there's another thing that's being passed down, which is also very important, which is the emotional state and traumas are actually passed down every generation. See, so some information will skip, but again, when we talk about epigenetics, we're talking about things that can be changed here in the now. So in your generation, you can change how and rewrite your DNA currently, you know. So what the important thing about being aware of this hybridization program is that as we are being utilized for our genetic material, the hybrid children that are being created, you know, are being raised on ships, for example. And in one of my experiences, you know, I experienced a hybridization ship. It's incredibly complex, that has different departments where they are genetically modifying, you know, the egg, whether it's going to be put into in vitro, or they have a processing area where the hybrid mothers are being giving birth even, and there's even a section for children there that are being trained or somehow implanted. So all of these things are occurring on these hybridization ships. And the interesting thing is that over a lifespan of a contactee, like for example myself, I will be taken several times throughout my lifetime to care for the children. And that's interesting because what is occurring again is this energetic imprint of information on these children, which is writing on their DNA as well, right? So this exchange that is occurring with the children is also created to create a certain environment for these children at the same time.
Pause for breath.
Yes.
This is very serious.
Okay.
Okay, we're really talking about some serious stuff here. Now, where do you think this is leading us?
Well,
bearing in mind that our minds create reality in terms of matrix. So somebody's engineering a matrix. Okay, yeah?
Yeah. In a sense, yes, we are, you know, living in a very controlled, systematically controlled environment. But the truth is that the human being as an organism which is holding consciousness is really the most advanced biotechnology here. We have the ability of understanding how to utilize the technology of the body, to utilize the information that is within the body, and to clear that information. And what I found, not just in my research, but in my own personal work, my own personal journey spiritually, is that as the more I destroyed all of those concepts of programming that I have, you know, taken on since child, my entire perception of reality has changed. And so the invitation is, you know, if you are able to destroy all of these programs that really, they don't belong to us, they don't belong to our parents, they don't belong to anyone except this created structured reality, then the human comes into this cleaning and cleansing of the body and the mind, in which it starts to come into a full integration of duality. Because if we are living in a situation and environment that causes us compartmentalization, the concept of separation and isolation, of course there's going to be a big split between that consciousness. So it's really important for us to reintegrate all of those fragments that we're talking about, and that can be done through either meditation or therapy or hypnosis, literally becoming conscious aware, not just on this physical dimension, but even in dream time. So
what do you call dream time? Is that the astral or something?
Yeah, you can call it the astral, but any time that you are sleeping and, you know, your mind is then coming into other planes of reality, you know, whether it's an illusion or I believe that all of these planes of reality are actually quite real. How we translate them, you know, how we translate them as dreams, they may seem like it's something very silly, like even a clown with a dog or something. We can imagine that as being some dream that's an illusion, but that's just because our parameters and our ability to translate that, what we're receiving, what we're seeing, is going through a filtration system. What's actually happening is actual exchange and experiences on other planes of existence. And so our ability to become conscious and aware must happen even in that dream time, because that's actually where, when we leave the body, the human soul is maybe even the most vulnerable, you know. And again, this is where we start having these experiences like contact as well, okay? Ultimately, the soul that is encapsulating this consciousness that is fragmented on multiple dimensions has the ability to reincorporate all of the fragments of itself. And as it does, then it becomes whole in a sense, where it can then move out of this structured reality, or this illusion of reality, and experience other aspects of creation, or, you know, even beyond this universe, beyond this multiverse that we live in. So that is the hope, and it is a lot of work, you know. It's a lot of work of consciousness and cleansing, but even in death, when the soul is ready to leave the body, the hope is that all of this training that you do as a human to learn how to move in and out of this physical shell. And I mean, there have been ritual practices and even ancient architectural structures that were built to help train the human to learn how to move in and out of the body, the soul actually coming in and out of the physical body. So we have to start to train how to move outside of this physical. And even when the body dies in death, we then have an option based on our frequency, based on all the information and all the healing and reintegration that you've done in this lifetime. You then have a new frequency which will allow you to traverse and travel maybe other frequencies of existence beyond this matrix multiverse, basically.
Well, that's a lot of work has been done on the post-death training.
Yes.
With military and, well, Max Spears, for instance, and so-called super soldiers, that they have been engaged in that kind of a process.
Yes. And it's very important, as you can see. There's a reason why they have spent so much time doing that, and they are. And but I'm talking about mass population has to become aware of this and conscious of this. You know, because right now we live in a reality where we believe that once we die, that's it. We may not have anything. Maybe we have an afterlife, but I don't think we understand.
Is that strictly
the
the sort of so-called Christio civilizations?
Yes.
Because surely the Eastern civilizations and non-Christio civilizations, I mean, if you talked about this kind of stuff as a Christian, the Book of Enoch, all that was removed, and you're burnt at the stake. Things like that happened, or mild incentives to to not have that kind of belief system. They were against the church. You know, that was treason.
Exactly.
I mean, how do you see that happening with the rest of the world, which is not Christian?
Well, you see, we have to move, hopefully, away from the structures of belief that were basically inserted into our society, into our belief systems through religion. Because again, you know, I was talking yesterday about the origin of these religions, which are really all began in these pagan, satanic practices and rituals, which were a part of these cultures that were brought on earth, I believe. And these practices of life, pro-life, or cyclical death, which is how this entire matrix structure was created. So if we pull away from these religious practices, which, and you know, I was raised studying many, many religions, from Buddhism to Zen to Sufism to Catholic. I mean, I was raised Catholic many years. I went to school Catholic, Christian, and even Muslim, even Judaism, you know, and they always get to the point where they are allowing you to understand that maybe you are, you know, this consciousness that is experiencing here to experience all of these tests and things. But they don't stress the fact, even Buddhism, afterlife, you know, you are still cycling through something.
Yeah.
So the whole focus is created by this same matrix, which the purpose is to maintain the human soul attached somehow.
The Archon reality matrix, there is a term. I mean, are you familiar with the term
Yes,
Archon?
of course. The
Yeah.
Archons, which are the ones that are siphoning that heavy life force out of these cyclical beings, these souls that are cycling on this planet Earth, right? And so, but the thing is that we need to look beyond that, because the new awareness comes from understanding the true technology of the human body. And when we understand how the structure of the human is on multiple dimensions, we're going to understand that this cyclical pattern of life and reincarnation is just part of this matrix multiverse.
And where you
this
go when
organism.
you pass on, some people call them, the moon is a soul recycling facility or some kind of thing. Is that part of it?
I don't tend to believe that myself. I mean, I think the moon is almost like maybe a satellite or maybe some kind of ship or a space or something of itself. But I don't believe that it plays that kind of a role in how these souls. If anything, I would say that the information or primordial consciousness perhaps filters through the central sun of this galaxy, because I believe that's how information is brought into this galaxy, and how it communicates with all planets. But otherwise, we're just talking about our concept of what the galaxy is under our structure of what it is. I mean, this is all created, right? The concept of how galaxies are put together, and so on and so forth. The structure of the universe is only what we have been told through our science and through our physics, which is quite limited.
They look at everything through a very small two-dimensional instrument called a telescope.
Exactly.
That little lens.
Yes, and it's not to discount what they're looking at. It can be very real for this matrix and what's created in this reality. But in one of my regressions, what I saw was that almost in this entire matrix universe is like an organism, a circular organism which has perhaps certain boundaries, and it's almost as if this is like a black hole. The entire thing is like a black hole. That means that because the consciousness is more contractive again, and I believe that that's because of the parasitic exchange that is mainly occurring in this existence. Beyond that is other cellular structures like the shape of a cellular structure, which is an organism that can be other multiverses, and they're maybe more expansive, like a white hole, and so on and so forth. There's other organisms of existence that go beyond this, what we're living in. So consciousness, as you know, has the ability of becoming aware of itself and exploring all aspects of reality. And whether it's high vibration or low vibration, it can experience all those aspects. And maybe in this time, it has experienced this low frequency, this parasitic. But if it's cycling over and over again, there is an opportunity, a suggestion for that consciousness to go beyond, explore other aspects.
Your presentation showed the omega point, the infinity.
Yeah.
Point, and we're in that omega point now, plus the emergence of the divine feminine.
Yes.
Could you, because this is other work that others are.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so the structure of the universe is like this. It looks like our current planet Earth, for example, is moving through a trajectory of this infinity cycle, and it seems like at one end and another end is from one dimension to another, let's say fourth to fifth dimension. And when we enter the center point of that infinity cycle, the frequency is risen to its highest point. And when that happens, I guess all aspects of reality, dimensional reality, are heightened. I believe that's why over the past, maybe 10 years, we've been feeling that time is speeding up more and more. And actually, that's been scientifically proven. And it's very interesting to see that, because as we move into this next dimension, let's say it's the fifth dimension, but again, it can be any number, designated number. What's occurring is that we're coming into a new shift, and I believe that that shift is a rebalancing of this information. And what that means is that maybe we're coming out of this masculine energy, this consciousness that is tied within this parasitic organism is now becoming more aware of itself by becoming aware of its totality. And when something becomes aware of its totality, it's now aware of the masculine and feminine aspect, all aspects of itself.
Plus outside matrix.
Sure, exactly. And so when that happens, there is an integration point where it then becomes whole. And I believe that that's the point that we're coming into.
The omega point.
The omega point, that integration, that whole, well, you can call it, it's what we know as unconditional love as well. This vibration, the highest frequency of creation, Okay, and that's what we can define as source, the source of all things.
Well, this is absolutely fantastic, absolutely fascinating. Now, have you written books, or have you done other presentations? Any other way people can see your work on YouTube or other organizations?
Absolutely. So I am writing my first book now. I should have it done by the end of this year. It's been a long time coming. But my website, I have many presentations out that you can see, and a lot of videos that I do. As well as interviews. Yeah, you can find them on my website at GeraldineOrozco.com, and I do have a hybrid mother and father, a hybrid parent support group. It's an international support group at hybridmother.com. And I also invite you to watch the new documentary that I participated in, Extraordinary: The Seeding, which focuses on the hybridization program and starting to understand that.
Who has created that?
John Sumple, by J3 Films, John Sumple, Jack Roth, and Jamie Chernoff. We just had a premiere in Pasadena this last week, so I invite you to check that out. It's a very informative...
Is that something that's available, will be on television, or
yes.
Where would they see that?
Yes, it will be public on Amazon and all, I think, main media streams. It will be, yes, in June. The exact date I don't know, but June is the date for that to go out. Yeah, so you can catch me in any of those places. And,
well, I'm really very honoured that you've come to the Basis Project, this wonderful conference, which is now rapidly closing, and we're all getting dressed up. You're absolutely superbly glamorous, and you're all ready to go tonight. Well, not rather tonight, but right away.
Yes.
So thank you so much, and blessings, and it's an honour, and thanks.
Thank you, Miles, for having me on. Thank you so much.